Hey Lake Point, Pastor Michael here to get you caught up on the second week of our series, Bless. The series focused around relational evangelism, a series where we're looking at 5 everyday ways to love your neighbor and change the world. And this week we took a look at something that sounds simple, but is something that so few of us actually do. And that something is listening. Now, one of the biggest barriers when it comes to listening is that we are too preoccupied with ourselves. We're not actually listening, we're just kind of waiting for our turn to speak. We're just kind of mentally queuing up what we're going to say next. We're so concerned with what we're going to say or how we're going to say it that we never really fully check into a conversation, or if we do, we quickly check out. We're so preoccupied with our own needs, wants, thoughts, and feelings during a conversation that it's virtually impossible for us to appreciate the needs, wants, thoughts, and feelings of another person, which is a problem because genuinely listening to another person is an incredible way to bless them. David Augsburger, he says it this way. He says, being heard is so close to being loved that for the average person, they're almost indistinguishable. When the people in our lives, when they feel unheard, it leaves them feeling unknown, which will ultimately leave them feeling unloved. If we want to love our neighbors, our coworkers, our friends, our family members, if we want to be a blessing, then we need to become intentional about listening. And thankfully, we have a pretty good example of someone who listens well. And his name is Jesus. In Luke chapter 18, we read about an interaction between Jesus and a blind beggar by the name of Bartimaeus. This is what it says starting in verse 35. When Jesus was coming close to Jericho, a blind man sat begging beside the road. The man heard the crowd walking by, and so he asked what was happening. Some people told him that Jesus from Nazareth was passing by, and so the blind man shouted, "Jesus, son of David, have pity on me." The people who were going along with Jesus, they told Bart to be quiet. But he shouted even louder, "Son of David, have pity on me." Jesus stopped and told some people to bring the blind man to him. Now, let's pause the story there for a second because don't miss what's going on here. Jericho is one of the last stops on the way to Jerusalem. People are getting ready for the Passover, and so the city is extremely busy and crowded. Yet, in the midst of all that chaos, there's this blind man crying out, "Have pity on me." I mean, the people traveling with Jesus, they tell Bartimaeus to leave Jesus alone, but he wouldn't. He couldn't. And so he cries out even louder, and this is what we read next. We read that Jesus asked the man, "Well, what do you want me to do for you?" And he says, "Lord, I want to see." Jesus replied, "Well, look and you will see. Your eyes are healed because of your faith." Now, when we read that story, it's easier for us to kind of focus in on the miracle. Like blind Bart can't see, Bart calls out to Jesus, Jesus heals Bart, the end. But don't skip over the important question that Jesus asked. Before healing him, Jesus asked him, "Well, what do you want me to do for you?" Which at first, that question might seem like it has an obvious answer. But that's the thing. We don't truly know the answer to questions like that unless we ask. Jesus lived his life in such a way that he didn't assume he knew what other people needed. And I think he would want us to actually do the same. Jesus wants us to resist the trap of assumption, and so he modeled for us what it looks like to ask questions and to genuinely listen to the answers given. The amazing thing about Jesus is he is always totally engaged with everyone he meets. He's completely mindful of them, their lives, their interests, their joys, and their sufferings. When he's with fishermen, he talks about fishing. When he's with farmers, he talks about seeds and soil and weeds. Jesus is always present with the people he meets as if there's no one else in the world. And that kind of attention, that kind of presence, that kind of listening, it changes the world. Because when we offer that to another human being, we change their world. Now, I know listening is such a simple concept, but the reason we're talking about it is because although we do it every day, very few of us do it well. And so if you want to become a better listener, here's 3 things you need to keep in mind. First up, when you're listening to someone, you actually need to remember to engage your brain. And what that means is you have to actually commit to using the processing power when you're listening to someone. Like you have to use the horsepower that you have up here. Don't just tune out and go on autopilot. Don't just be passively nodding along or saying, "Oh yeah," or "mm-hmm" every so often. Not speaking is not the same as listening. In order to listen, you need to actually think about what is being spoken to you. And so don't listen passively, listen actively, engage your brain. The second thing that you need to do is erase the noise. It's no surprise that there are a lot of distractions that we kind of need to fight against when we're listening to someone. In his book, Dave Ferguson describes 4 types of noise that we actually need to learn to tune out. And so first we have physical noise, which is any noise that happens around us in the setting that the conversation is kind of taking place in. It could be the hum of a fan or the sound of cars driving by, literally anything. Second, we have psychological noise, which is the noise that happens between our ears. It's the thoughts that race through our minds completely unrelated to the conversation at hand. Third, we have physiological noise, which is the noise that happens because we're feeling something inside of our bodies. I mean, maybe you skip lunch and so your stomach is growling, or perhaps you didn't skip lunch and what you ate is making your colon growl. The fourth type of noise that we have to learn to tune out is semantic noise. And semantic noise is caused when we get confused by the meaning of the speaker's words. And in the instances when there are semantic misunderstandings, then you need to make sure you ask the person to clarify what they meant by what they said. Which leads us to the third tip in becoming a better listener, and it's to exercise good questions. And often a good question is a clarifying question, kind of like we just talked about clarifying semantic issues. Other times, a good question is a discovery question that helps you learn or appreciate something new about the person that you're speaking with. And questions are a very powerful listening tool at your disposal. Some categories of questions to kind of keep in mind when talking to another person are you can talk to them about their history. Like, tell me your story. What was life like growing up for you? You can ask questions about heart. What's your favorite hockey team, restaurant, vacation destination? You can ask questions about habit. Like, what do you like to do with your free time? Like, what do you like to do for fun? And you have questions about hurt. How are you doing with whatever situation you know that person is facing? History, heart, habit, and hurt. Clarifying and discovery-based questions are a fundamental component to listening well. So, if you want to be a better listener, you need to engage your brain, erase the noise, and exercise good questions. Listening is an act of love, and we cannot bless the world without listening to people. Well, friends, thanks for listening. Enjoy working through discussion questions, and remember, you're blessed to be a blessing.